Good evening, everyone. Students, parents, teachers, counselors, and anyone who's interested in how to write a college admissions essay. I'm Alan Gelb. I'm the author of the book that you see up there, Conquering the College Admissions Essay in 10 Steps. The second edition of this book just came out a couple of weeks ago. I'm very pleased with its success and very glad to hear that it's helped a lot of people bring some order and understanding to this challenging assignment. And, I don't think you need to tell me that this is a nerve-wracking process altogether applying to colleges in the 21st century. But I tend to think that one of the more anxiety-ridden aspects of this process has to do with this personal essay, this personal statement. There's a number of different ways to refer to it. Basically, we're talking about the essay on the Common Application, which this year has gone from a 500-word word count up to a 650 maximum allowed word count. And it's a really challenging assignment. But before we get into how to actually approach it, let's spend a moment thinking about what it means in the overall process. In a sense, you should probably think of your personal statement as your interview. When I was a young person, which is a while ago, and I was applying to colleges, I was expected to put on a jacket and tie and go to the college campus and be interviewed by somebody and be really nervous about that. That kind of dynamic has gone the way of the gas station attendant who pumps your gas. It's really not there anymore. For also economic reasons, a lot of colleges don't really maintain the staff to have on-campus interviews. The counselors are out there looking for students. And so if you do have an interview on campus, it's more likely one that you'll have with perhaps an upperclassman or a graduate student, and it's really more of an informational interview for your purposes rather than for them to make judgments about you. So the way that many schools come to know you is through your personal statement, and in fact, the personal statement has been ranked by the National Association for College Admission Counselors as the fourth most important determinant among all the factors that go into your application. That's above that. That's first you have your grades and your SAT scores and your class rank, and then you've got the essay above extracurricular activities, recommendations, and other things that are in fact important but seem to be somewhat less important than the essay. And also, interestingly, the essay has been shown to be the #1 tip factor, which means that if there are two candidates of pretty equal value in terms of all those other criteria, then the essay could be the one that will tip you onto the acceptance pile. So why is that? Let's think about it. Well, if you're applying to schools, particularly to very high-level schools, everybody who's applying is going to have some stuff that you have. They're going to have the same kinds of really good ammunition, great grades, and board scores, and so forth. And therefore, the essay becomes sort of the place to differentiate yourself. It's, in a sense, your thumbprint. And so the purpose of this whole thing is to figure out how you can differentiate yourself, how you can find a voice that is memorable, and how you can sort of create a kind of conversation with that counselor, that admissions counselor, who's reading hundreds and hundreds of essays. So we're going to spend a few minutes today looking over a PowerPoint that I have, and then I'm going to be taking your questions, which I already see are coming in. So let's jump right into this PowerPoint. Here you see my book, How to Create a Winning Personal Statement. And we're going to do kind of an overview of some top tips here. But first, I want to start with a couple of rules, because none of this has any meaning unless you sign on to these rules that I think are absolutely inviolable, and you can't ignore them. The first rule that I lay down for my students, and I hope you'll lay it down for yourself, is to have complete ownership over your essay. You must never let anybody else write your essay. I'm not talking only about parents who sometimes, maybe in the best of interest, try to intrude themselves a little bit onto this process. You can't have your brother or your sister do it. You can't trade something with a friend to do it. And if you're looking for somebody to write for you, that is a college essay writing service, you're going to fall into a big trap. Now, I'm a college essay coach. You can read all about me on my website, which is called conqueringthecollegeessay.com, and I work with students all over the world, and today's technology allows me to do that, which is really interesting for me. But I never write for students. What I do is I act as an editor. I train an enormous amount of focus onto this product, something that students have never seen before, the level of focus that I dedicate to this. But I don't write for students, because the whole point here is for this essay to capture your authentic voice, not mine. And not some person in an essay writing service who's turning out something generic. So I'm interested in helping students develop one-of-a-kind essays, and that's what they do. Secondly, this rule number 2 is that you have to be prepared to work at the process, because writing is really hard work. And I work a lot of times with very high achieving students, some of whom actually identify themselves as talented writers and aspiring writers, and in fact they are, but that doesn't mean that they have an easy time with this assignment. I'm a professional writer. I have been for close to 40 years, and I don't have an easy time when I sit down to write 650 words of pureless prose, particularly when there's a whole lot at stake, and I'm exposing something personal about myself. And so you have to really work at the process, and that means allotting time. You can't expect to do this overnight. It's not going to happen. How long does this take to do? I like to tell people, give it at least 3 weeks. You want to let it cook. You want to let drafts settle in between as you go from one to the other, and you don't want to rush it. So those are the 2 rules. They're not overwhelming, but they are strict. Okay, let's go on to my tips here, okay? The first tip, as I've already started to suggest, is to give yourself time. This is not something, as I say, that's going to happen overnight. There's the exploratory process that's involved, and then there's the drafting process. How many drafts does this take? I can't answer that question. It really is variable, and it really depends on the student. And it doesn't depend necessarily on the academic achievement of the student. Some of my very fine students are a bit inhibited here, and some of my less achieving students have an easier time with this. It's sort of odd. It has a lot to do with the emotional openness that you're bringing to this situation. It's variable. It depends on the focus you're bringing to it. It depends on the procrastination that you might be struggling with. And in my book, I have some rather useful techniques on how to combat procrastination, because it's a huge problem for everybody. Okay. The second tip here has to do with asking yourself questions. Of course, that's the first question I always get, is how do you find something to write about? And there can't be a better question, because you're faced with a completely blank slate, and that's in and of itself rather terrifying. And again, you're trying to put out something about yourself that's memorable and that shows you in a good light. I sometimes tell students that there are 3 things that your essay has to do. It has to show you as a likable person, somebody who can make up a college community. That doesn't mean a noble person without any flaws, a sweet person, whatever. It means a sincere person, a person who's capable of reflecting on himself or herself. The second thing that you have to do is show some arc of development in your essay, that it starts in one place and it ends somewhere else, some kind of growth. And thirdly, you have to show that you can write, and that might be the easiest one of all. And my book really holds your hand to take you through the process of drafting, editing yourself, goes from first draft to second draft to polishing to proofreading. More about that as we continue. So going back to what you're doing here, you're asking yourself questions, and in my book there's about 30 exploratory questions that I use when I work with students, and you can work with them yourself. They're sort of surprising questions, things like, when has my mind and body ever felt in perfect harmony? When have I ever felt rage? Have I ever felt betrayed? If I have to picture my 2 or 3 snapshots from my life, what would come out? Is there a place that feels truly special to me? As I say, there's about 30 of these, and when I work with a student, we go over them together. They answer them very quickly, just a sentence or 2 per each one, and then we go over them together, and we find sort of relationships. But you can do that yourself. You can spend time with it, give it like 2 or 3 days and see what you're coming back to, which of these answers you're gravitating toward. And that probably is an indicator that there's something there that wants to be written about, okay? One thing that you must not do in this essay is to blow your own trumpet. This isn't a resume. This isn't an opportunity for you to impress somebody. Oh, it is. I mean, you're going to impress somebody, but not necessarily with your achievements. You're going to impress somebody with your sincerity, with your candor, with your humor, with your insight. I tell people to think of themselves as if they're sitting at a party next to somebody, okay? If I'm sitting next to you at a party and you don't know me and I start telling you, listing my achievements, you're going to get up and walk over and get yourself a soda, okay? If I tell you an interesting story, something that really grabs your attention, you may be inclined to want to get to know me a little more, which is what this is all about. And the way to do that, the way to capture that attention, is by telling a narrative. Now, a narrative is a story. People have been telling stories ever since, the cave dwellers were sitting around a fire. We all love stories. We love good stories. And it's really helpful in this situation to understand that the narrative is a form. Just as a dance is a form, as a football play is a form, the narrative is a form. And I have distilled that form to 4 elements. So if you understand, and this is all in my book, in the first chapter of my book, if you understand the elements of a narrative, then you can say to yourself, I can actually do this. This is something that, if I follow this formula, I may actually be able to get somewhere. So there are 4 elements that make up the narrative as I've identified them. The first one we'll call the once. Every story takes place in a piece of time. Fairy tales start with once upon a time. The Bible starts with in the beginning. A Tale of Two Cities starts with, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Your 650-word essay, or slightly below that, is going to take place in a piece of time. So it's going to be your task to figure out when to best begin that story and when to end it. Those are the 2 hardest parts of writing a piece of prose. When to start it, when to end it. If you're writing about your trip to Costa Rica to build houses for Habitat for Humanity, you're not going to start in the airport in Des Moines. You're going to start in somewhere in Costa Rica, I would imagine. Okay, so you have to figure out the once. Then you have to make sure that there's something extraordinary going on that pulls this tale out of the realm of the ordinary. So I don't know. There's the famous maxim of newspaper writing, which is, dog bites man is, an ordinary story. Man bites dog is an extraordinary story. You may think that you don't have an extraordinary tale in your life, and you don't, and you may not, but you're still going to find that something that breaks out of the ordinary day-to-day of your life, okay? And it might be a passion, it might be, you might make this piece come alive with your account of what it's like for you to hunt for butterflies, or to the thrill that you gain out of collecting antique timepieces. I don't know what it is, but that could also be the extraordinary thing. Okay, then you have to have some tension and conflict. So stories begin because things happen in them that sort of up the ante against the protagonist. You know this from your English classes, okay? If nothing happens, if there's no conflict, then there's no story. Now, conflict can be big or small. It can be internal or external. It can be between individuals, or between you and society, or you and nature, or you and technology, you and your family. I mean, there's so many ways to bring out conflict, but there has to be something at stake here that you're going to try to resolve. That's what readers like to read about. They like to read about how conflicts are resolved. And again, conflict sounds like, it has to be, an earthquake or a dread disease or something like that. It doesn't. I mean, humor, for instance, is loaded with conflict. Slipping on a banana peel is conflict, okay? So you'll read the book and you'll see a lot more about what I mean by conflict. And then finally, the fourth element that you must have is the point. When the reader gets to the end of the story, he or she has to have some feeling of why he or she was being asked to read it. Now, you think of an Aesop's fable, for instance, the fox and the grapes, for instance, the point is right out there. It's specified for you. There's a moral. You're not going to do this in your story, but you need to know, and the reader needs to know, what this was all about, and why you were asking that person to spend time reading it, okay? Those are the four elements, and when you get a sense of that, and you really have an understanding, then I think when you pair it up with your work that you've done on finding a topic, you'll be ready to get into your first draft. And again, as you know from your English classes, rewriting is at the heart of writing. You need to learn to get into it, to enjoy it. After many, many years of being a writer, for me, much of the pleasure of writing comes from rewriting. It's like sculpting, it's like working with clay, it's like taking something that's amorphous and lumpy and lopsided, and it's making it beautiful. So I'd love for you to get into that feeling, and I'd like for you folks to really enjoy this experience, because in fact, it's an extremely stimulating experience. You may never have had the opportunity to write with such depth about yourself, and that's quite a revelation. Why is this not? Oh, there we go. Okay. I think I just went too far. Will you bear with me as I go back? Okay. No, I didn't. Okay. So after you've gone through your drafts, and again, we can have 3 drafts, we can have 8 drafts. There's no downside to 8 drafts other than that it takes more time, but it's not like you're being bad if you have 8 drafts. There's no stigma attached to it. Some writers and some essays require more drafts, and that's just the way it is. And if you've gotten into 8 drafts, that means you're really with the process and you're doing good work. When you're finished with that process, and that's all about structure and tone and clarifying your point and really making it as solid and artful as you can, then you'll be ready to start proofreading. That's a very important part of this process. It doesn't always count as much in a piece of writing, but in this particular essay, it's really vital that you proofread to the best, not only of your ability, but to the best of anybody's ability. So that means you need to get help, which could be through a teacher or somebody in your life who's actually very good at words. You'll use the proofreading tools on your word processing program, of course, but you can't fully rely on those. So there are nice little tricks in my book about how to proofread in a way that's really canny, and that involves things like blowing it up to. First of all, you have to have hard copy. You can't proofread on your screen. You have to print it out and proofread it. You could print it out in like 16-point type, so you really see things in a different way, even though that's not ecologically that sound. But give yourself a break in the situation. Some people proofread once only for commas, and then they proofread another time only for quotation marks, let's say. People have been known to proofread backwards. So there's all kinds of tricks which I talk about in the book. And why does it have to be this perfect, you ask? Because what you're really dealing with here is somebody that has very little time for you. The person who's going to be reading this, as I've indicated, has hundreds of essays to read, many hundreds, and you probably have 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. So if you take an extra second because somebody has to figure out why that comma happens to be in that place where it doesn't belong there, then you've squandered that person's time and you've squandered your opportunity. Not that you won't get into a school because you've put a comma in the wrong place, but why risk it? You can really make this as close to perfect as you can. Okay. You'll also want to get other readings, but only up to a point. Certainly feedback is very valuable and important, but and you'll want to get that from your teachers and your counselors. You may want to get it from people in your life who you think are good readers. That might be somebody that really loves books, has been in a book group, always has a book out from the library. You know who they are. Your aunt or your uncle, your neighbor. And impose on that person. Say, can you read my piece? Can you really look at it and give it a sound reading? Okay, they'll be happy to do that. And then at a certain point, you have to bring the ownership back to yourself, and say you've done it. You've done your due diligence. You've gotten your readings, and you're ready to go. And then you put it to bed, because if you keep picking it apart, you keep worrying over it, you can sort of sap some of the energy out of it. So that's my presentation today, folks, and now we have some ample time to take questions, and I see there are quite a few of them, so I'm going to just jump in here. And I have a question here from Elisa, who asks, how do you even begin to start the essay? Well, there's a number of ways for me to approach that question, okay? The first way I would say to approach the essay, to recap what I was talking about, is to understand that it makes a lot of sense for you to write a story, not just a recitation of achievements or something that feels impersonal, but a story from your life. And so it makes sense to understand the elements of a story, of a narrative, and my book does that very conveniently, but maybe you can find another way to do that if you wish. And then you have to find a topic, and I have to discuss that process. And then you have to gird your loins and look at that blank sheet of paper and allow yourself to start. And I talked a little bit about procrastination. I just want to spend another moment talking about it, because it really is the kind of thief in the night that steals things away from you and creates crisis situations. So there are little tricks of the mind that you can play. You can tell yourself, this is really excruciating for me, but I'm going to allow myself to create quotas, and I'm going to write 50 words tonight. Well, you're talking about something that's 650 words. 50 into 650 is what, 12, 13, something like that? 13 days you can get a first draft, and it's still early enough in the process for you to do that. If you want to be a little more ambitious, you can make it 100 and chop that in half, So that's how I would say you should start. And when you find blocks, when you find roadblocks, you can use things like free writing, for instance, which is another device I talk about in my book, which is where you just write in a totally uninhibited way. It could be even gibberish. Set yourself a timer for 10 minutes, and it's like a limbering exercise. Anything that comes out is fine. You don't worry about anything, and then you can look at what you've written, and there may be some seeds in there that you can pluck out and make use of. Okay. I have a question here. Is it okay to have a strong voice in the essay? Let me just see if there's more to that. It feels strange doing that, but I keep hearing that this is the way to write an essay. So I wonder why it feels strange. To me, that's the whole business of doing this, is to find a strong voice, an intimate voice. I don't want that strong voice. I have had students who have started out with me really trying to sound authoritative in a way that felt impersonal and off-putting. Your strong voice will come out of your honesty and your candor and your sincerity, and that's what's going to make that connection with the reader. So strength comes out of that and out of your ability to communicate. Okay, and you need to have that. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. What are considered cliche essays that we should avoid writing? So, being a college essay coach, I hear strange things sometimes, and I've had situations where I've had students write what I thought were terrific essays, and the student and I and even the parents have really been on board with them, and then they show it to a school counselor, let's say, who says, "Oh no, you can't have dialogue in your essay." And this comes back, with a frantic report to me. Well, Mr. Jones says you can't have dialogue in your essay, and I say, what is Mr. Jones talking about? Because I've had students get into Harvard, Princeton, and Yale writing dialogue in their essays, and I don't know where some of these rules come from. But there are a lot of rules floating around in the atmosphere, and other sorts of things you might hear is that you can't write about dead pets. Well, my son, who was one of my early guinea pigs, who's now 27, wrote about his dead pet and was admitted early decision to Oberlin College. So that's gave lie to that idea. People say you can't write about sports injuries, grandparents, any family members is one I've heard and laughed at. What do you mean a 17-year-old writer can't write about family members? That's been a huge part of that writer's life. Who are you to say that they can't do that? So I don't say there are things that are taboo. There are cliches, to be sure, but cliches have to do with tone more than they have to do with subject. There's a saying in writing circles that there are no new stories, there are only new ways of telling them. I think it's pretty sensible saying, actually. So cliche comes out of a kind of conventional, prosaic thinking, and also cliches come out of cliches. So when you start using phrases like as long as the day is long, or as I'm having a blank on cliches, but there's a million of them. You know what I'm talking about. And also a lot of the contemporary cliches that are just out there all over the place in the air, thinking outside of the box, pushing the envelope, hitting it out of the ballpark. These are all things, you turn on TV, you turn on the news, you look on the internet, and everybody's saying these things. And those are cliches, and you must avoid that stuff. And again, that's in my book. So thanks for asking that question, Avril. It's a good question. I do want to link it to an issue, though, about taboo topics. By taboo, I mean things that you are forbidden to write about. I've just said I don't really think there are forbidden topics. I don't think it's my job to steer students away from things they want to write about. But sometimes I'll say to a student, look, I know that, having struggled with an eating disorder, let's say, has been a very important thing in your life and has been a great victory in your life getting beyond it. But that's really gotten to be kind of an epidemic problem on college campuses today, eating disorders, and as valiant as your work has been in conquering that or coping with that, it may not actually be serving you well to raise that here and to raise a red flag for a admissions counselor. So I hate to even say that and to make anybody feel like they shouldn't do things, but there are realities involved in this work as well. I mean, you're packaging yourself. Just as the coach tells you to package yourself for when you go to, your high school coach tells you when you're going to meet with the sports people on campus, well, you're packaging yourself in this essay as well, and not in a way that's in any way that I mean should be artificial, but you do need to think of yourself as, going back to what I said before, as a likable person who can bring something to a college community. I had an odd situation with a student a year or two ago, whose father approached me and he asked me to work with his daughter, and he said she's very angry. And you know what? He was right. She was really angry, and it was all over the place, and it was clearly a psychological problem. And I just did everything I could to rein her in, and I became the focus of some of her anger, which was fine for me because I can take it, But that's not going to work in a college essay. You can't come across as an angry person in a college essay, because the person who reads it on the admissions committee is going to worry that your poor roommate is going to have a hard time with you, and what the heck does he need that for? He being the admissions counselor. So that's what I have to say on that topic. Okay. Let's see what Cindy is asking here. Okay. Can I reuse essays? I'm not sure what you mean by this. What I sort of suspect that you mean, and I'm glad you're raising it because it gives me an opportunity to talk about this issue. I think you mean, can you take your personal statement and then reuse it for a supplemental essay? Now, some of you may not be far enough along the arc of discovery around this whole college admissions process to know what I mean by supplemental essays. Hold on one second, though. I can take a little drink here and keep talking. When you apply to college, you will be asked to do this personal statement for the Common App, the 650-word essay. And then you will also be asked by each one of the schools to write an assortment of supplemental essays. Those are essays that usually ask things like, what are your academic goals and objectives? Or how am I going to contribute to a diverse college community? Or what is my most significant extracurricular activity? Some schools ask you to do 3 of those. I just had a potential client call me today to discuss this whole thing, and she said that her son was planning to apply to a school that asked for the student to write 10 supplemental essays, which is kind of horrifying. So there's a lot of essay writing involved in this process, and what I suggest you all do is what I urge you to do is really to approach this all strategically. There's a good service out there. It's called collegeessayorganizer.com. Again, College Essay Organizer. For a nominal fee, about $20, and believe me, I don't get any kickback from it, you can send them all the colleges that you're planning to apply to, and they will send you back all the essay prompts that you're going to have to deal with. So, you may have to write 30 essays, let's say. When you get that back, you can begin to look strategically at the big picture, and you can say, I see that 7 of these 12 schools that I'm applying to are asking me to write some form of this diversity essay. How am I going to contribute to a diverse college community? And so I'm going to try to create sort of a template that I can reuse from one to the other. I may tweak it a bit. With the academic objectives essay, You're going to have to write that for all of the colleges, most likely. So, you can, again, use that template approach, and you can say, 2/3 of my essay is going to be boilerplate, which means, if you don't know that expression, I can just bring it over from one to the other, as boilerplate language is used in contracts, okay? So, my first third of my essay is about how I decided I wanted to be an engineer, okay? My second third of the essay is, what I've done to advance my that interest, holding an internship or, studying in certain programs or whatever. The last part of my essay will be customized for that particular school. So I want to study engineering at Cornell because of this. I want to study engineering at Duke because of this. And that means that you have to spend a lot of time on these websites, these college websites, which are literally stuffed with information. I don't know if you know that or not, but I also write materials for colleges and universities. I write for recruitment materials and development materials, those kinds of big glossy view books that you bring home from the schools with you. I write those for schools all over the country. And I know that schools are very invested in making their websites as rich as possible. So there'll be most likely lots of student blogs, teacher blogs, archive news for various departments on these websites. And your job is to go in and penetrate that. Start Googling, Cornell Engineering Department news, and you'll get to a web page that will show you some interesting stuff that's happened there lately, And if you cite that kind of information in your essay, they'll see that you've done your work, and they'll be impressed, okay? But you're not going to reuse the Common App essay in any other form, because then you're dealing with redundancy. Question from Abby, an easy question that I like to answer. What's the name of your book? It's called Conquering the College Admissions Essay in 10 Steps. It's published by 10 Speed Press, which is a division of Random House. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, through my website, which is conqueringthecollegeessay.com, and wherever, as they say, fine books are sold. And it's actually kind of gone to the top of the heap of these sorts of books and is either number one or sometimes number two of such books, okay? And there are other good books out there too, but mine I think is really condensed and very useful. Okay, question from Helen. For essays, how personal should you go? Like, can we talk about sensitive subjects like overcoming anxiety and mental illness, or would that raise red flags and hinder admissions? Well, that's a complex question, Helen. If there's always an issue if you've been sort of sidelined by certain things in your life. If you've had an anxiety disorder that has actually been crippling, and let's say has made you go to a certain, a different kind of school than a mainstream school, and you feel like you need to talk about something in that essay, then that may be something that you need to do. Or you might also save that. Probably the better approach is to save that for a different essay. There's usually an option in your application process for where the school says, if there's anything else you want us to know about you, please submit an essay about that, okay? And that's a good place to say, I did suffer from a crippling anxiety disorder. I sought treatment for it. I went to a special school. I feel healthier and stronger than I ever could have imagined, and I'm ready for whatever comes my way, I like that better than trying to deal with it in the personal statement. In the personal statement, I like there to be a feeling of some joy in life, and I've found students able to do that even when they're talking about diseases that they've had. For instance, I had a student last year who was writing about having had childhood cancer, and she put it all in the context of a dance class that she started taking, at some point after she overcame the cancer. And that gave a context to it. It gave it a structure by which to tell that story, but it also showed a kind of embrace of life that was very positive and made me feel, and I suspect it would make the reader feel closer to her, and not. Some people are worried about reading material that's very sad, and so when we deal with such material, it's good to find a way to layer it with some other material. But that's good question. Can you start your narrative with a conflict? Yes. You can start it with a conflict. You can introduce your conflict halfway through. A conflict. Let's imagine an essay that's written in real time. You remember I was talking, if you go back to that idea of once upon a time, the once, where the story starts. So let's imagine you're telling a story in real time, which means you have 650 words and you're going to evoke 5 minutes of actual time. Well, let's say the situation is that you've fallen off a boat into the open sea, okay? That first sentence is, wham, I fell over the boat, That's introducing the conflict right at the beginning, where it makes sense to do. And your story is about what happened and what went through your mind as you're bobbing around like a cork. And so that's a good place to introduce that kind of conflict. Usually it doesn't happen right at the beginning, but as I say, it could, Holly's asking, what do I mean by an arc of development? So I'm glad you asked that for clarification. I mean that, all pieces have an arc, that they start somewhere and there's a middle section and then they end. And that doesn't mean that they have to follow a chronological linear path. I mean, they don't have to start at the beginning and go to the middle and end at the ending. You might start with the ending and go back to the beginning somehow. But they need to have an arc of what I'm calling development, which means that there's a story that's going on here of your personal development. What this thing that happened in your life that you're telling this, how that changed you, It doesn't have to be a gigantic sea change. It could just be an alteration of your point of view. I have a lot of students who, particularly those who have not had conflict-ridden lives, they're very fortunate. They come from nice, relatively privileged families, and they, knock wood, haven't had bad things happen to them. And they come to me and they say, I'm stuck. I don't know what to write. And I say, well, a little bit, because the immigrant kid or the kid that's had the parent who's been ill or who's been ill himself or who knows what has really a lot to write about, but you're a little stuck. So some of these students write about. They might take something that's really a passion for them, fencing, knitting, swimming, dancing, drawing. I've had practically everything, and they use that activity to create a narrative structure. It's not really a narrative because not much is happening, but they follow that action. Let's say it's a dance practice or a dance move from point A to point B to point C. Now, point A starts at the beginning of the essay. I'm doing a jeté. I'm not a ballet dancer. I'm sorry, I don't know the terms, but they're placing you right in the action in just a few sentences because it doesn't take much to convey that action. Okay. The second paragraph, they pull back and they start telling me their story, a reflection. I got into dancing because I had a hip displacement when I was a child and I needed to strengthen it. Or I got into dancing because my grandmother was a dancer and she was the person I admired most, and this was our way to get close, or whatever. Third paragraph, you pick up more of the dance, and you do a little bit more, 30, 40, 50 words. Fourth paragraph, you're saying what this has meant to you, where are you going to go with it, what skills it's given you, what insight it's given you into life. To me, the dance is about language. It's a bodily language. It informs every other language that I use, And the fifth paragraph, you complete that action with ending the dance or whatever. I hope this is at all clear to you what I'm talking about, but there are examples in the book as well. So it's lending a narrative feeling to a piece that really is more reflective than narrative, and so it's a good device. But there again, you also have an arc of development, because the reader is watching the development of a thought process in your mind, seeing you carry a thought really through a whole number of steps. Okay, I hope that's helpful to you, Holly. Hold on. I have a question from Sonia, which says, what do you mean by having growth in the essay? I think that's pretty much what I just talked about with development, the arc of development. I mean, you want to show that you started somewhere and you ended somewhere, and I know something more about you. I saw something happening. It doesn't have to be gigantic growth. It could be very subtle growth. And I don't have time to give extended examples here tonight. But, I want to see that I see something, because you're a young person and your job right now is to develop more insight into yourself. That's the work of being a younger person going on to another stage of your life, which is what you're doing when you're applying to college, okay? So I want to see that you have been able to get some insight into your life. If I see that that's happened, I'll be impressed with you. What should the level of formality, this is from Nicholas, be for a college admission essay? It doesn't have to be formal, Nicholas, and I urge you away from formal language. And often people, when they talk about formal language, talk about sort of stilted language or overly complicated language. One of the things I always say to my students is, please write simply, okay? Nobody in the world is going to hold it against you if you write simply. A lot of students get really into trouble when they're trying to write fancy, okay, or write complicated. Ernest Hemingway wrote simply and majestically and beautifully. If you could do that, you'll be golden, So what we're aiming here for is natural language. Conversational language is nice too. So a formal tone can be very off-putting, okay? By the same token, an overly informal tone will also be off-putting. Talking about something as da bomb or whatever, forget about it. This is not the place or the time for that. Okay. I have a question from Shane. I have your book, but it has a blue cover. Okay, that's the first edition of my book. Is there a big difference between them? There is. It's the red one, the new one is, as they say, bigger and better than ever. But you'll do very well with the blue one. Thousands of students have, and I wouldn't worry about it. Make use of the blue one, and don't worry about it. Okay. So I have Duncan. Should the essay exclusively be an anecdote, or other forms equally desirable? It doesn't have to be a narrative, but it doesn't have to be a narrative. But I predicated my whole theory and the success of this book on the fact that I think that's the most easily attainable way to approach this essay for most students, and it's also the most easily approachable form for most readers. So if you decided that I just want to take this opportunity to look at the current essay topics from the Common App. I'm going to read them quickly. Some students have a background or story that is so central to their identity that they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. That's the first one. And until this year, they had one of the prompts was to write about a topic of your choice. they've taken that away, but this one is almost the same. It's almost completely open-ended. The second one is to recount an incident or time when you experienced failure. How did it affect you and what lessons did you learn? Number 3, reflect on a time when you challenged a belief or an idea. What prompted you to act? Would you make the same decision again? 4, describe a place or environment where you are perfectly content. What do you do or experience there, and why is it meaningful to you? 5, discuss an accomplishment or event, formal or informal, that marked your transition from childhood to adulthood within your culture, community, or family. That's also rather open-ended. So interestingly, if you Google 2012 Common App essay topics, and you'll see the former ones, you'll see that some of the prompts were rather more impersonal in nature. You might be talking about, they asked you, for instance, like a work of literature or art that's had a powerful influence on you, or a topic of national, regional, or local importance that you wanted to talk about. And interestingly, they've taken away these topics that lead the writer more into a more impersonal kind of writing, and they focused on these more personal prompts. So to answer your question, Duncan, I do think that you should go into what you're calling an anecdote, what I'm calling a personal story. Okay. Bethany asks, how long does the essay have to be? Good question. Your max is 650. You don't have to write the max, but you can't be skimpy about it. So I was working with a student today who had a terrific 486 words, and I said, that's the good news, they're terrific. The bad news is it's going to feel skimpy. This is not the time for you to feel skimpy. So beef it up until you can get into the area of, like, let's say 600. I guess I would allow 580. I don't like going below 580. Okay, it's going to feel like you're a little bit, to excuse the expression, constipated. Sarah Verdijo asks, what does this essay need to be about? I'm sorry if you have answered this. I wasn't here for the beginning. Don't mind answering again, Sarah. It needs to be about you. It needs to be about you. You're the whole topic here. It needs to get you out on the paper, your internal life. Something about your internal life that's not going to appear anywhere else on the in the packet here. So you don't need to tout your achievements here. You have to get yourself out here. Okay. I'm just going to jump over a few that we've sort of seen. Let me look at this one. Okay, we've seen that one. Okay, here's one from Sonia. What are some of the most interesting or unique essays you've seen? I have a number of them in my book, and you know what? I almost love every single essay that I work on with students, and I'm amazed at the level of writing that they attain. There are some favorites that I have. I had a student a couple of years ago who wrote about, it was one of these narrative structures I'm talking about, where he took an activity and he pieced it through the essay so he could write about something else, really. And it was about tap dancing in a school musical, and it was layered with his struggle with juvenile diabetes, and how he had to chart out his activities so that he would never get stuck being having a blackout or something like that. And it was just so artfully done, so really such a really fresh approach to something that could have seemed, it's going to sound callow here or cynical or whatever, but sort of disease of the week. That's what I'm talking about when you say, are there any cliche things? You can write about an essay about an illness, let's say, that's going to feel like disease of the week. TV movie. and that's almost a terrible thing for me to say. Obviously, I feel complete sympathy for anybody who's gone through illnesses, but what we're talking about here is finding a way to tell a story so that it doesn't feel like that so that the whole be all and end all of your story with illness, let's say, isn't about just the illness, but about the way you've coped with it, your method of coping. There's a wonderful essay in the book and on my website, conqueringthecollegeessay.com. One of the early essays I did by a young woman who went to Brown. The guy with the tap dancing went to MIT, so they both did pretty well. And she was talking about, dealing with her sister's brain tumor and finding an avenue to connect with all the pain that she had suppressed and stored away by the process of rehearsing a scene from Our Town, the Thornton Wilder play, which is really all about mortality, that she was rehearsing at a drama camp that she was going to. So it was so memorable and so original, and you could not like it. Okay, so I've got time for one or two more questions here, and somebody's asking me to repeat the website for College Essay Organizer. That's an easy one. It is collegeessayorganizer1word.com. Somebody asked me, should you write about the college in your essay? Not necessary. Okay, in your academic objectives essay, which you'll have to write, there's plenty, ample opportunity for you to write about the strengths of that school and why you're choosing it. Would it be too complex or too overbearing to construct a college essay using a compilation of short stories and anecdotes that exemplify a major premise? Yeah, that would be really tough to do in 650 words. If you are a master writer and you think you could do that, try it, but I bet you can't. Okay? So I will thank you for all being here tonight. I wish you great luck, and the good news is that we all have stories within us. Okay? So go through the process, understand the form, and I absolutely have a conviction that you'll be able to do this. Okay? Don't clutch. Good luck.